more like skinny and like he looked kind of like a homunculus.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like giant hands, giant head, giant lips, giant feet.
Yeah. But like really skinny arms and kind of like how I look, actually.
I wish you wouldn't do that. Because it's Podrzebie, the comic book nerdcast that dares to ask, what, me worry? I'm your idiot, Kyle Bridget, and with me, your co-idiot,
Patty McInerney. Co-idiot again?
What? You're going to do this now? Really?
Yes.
We talked about this.
There's no time like the present, all right? Richard Nixon.
All right. You know what? We'll talk about this after the show. We got to move on.
Yeah, let's move on. So welcome to the It's Ramblin' Men department, where we talk about what's on our mind.
What's on your mind, Patrick?
All right, listen, I know it might be a little soon to go back to this well, but glass eyes?
Again?
You remember that?
Yeah, it was like a couple episodes ago. Yeah, glass eyes.
Yeah, glass eyes.
Well, there's two people have them.
Yeah,
that's what we decided.
Yeah, too few people have them. I think is what
that's
we
better
decided.
than one person having two.
At that point, you don't get glass eyes; you just get sunglasses.
Yeah, I think so. But you might get those sunglasses with like the eyes on springs. That's what I'd do if I was a less scrupulous person. Is like switch a blind person's glasses up with those, and they wouldn't know.
Yeah, or those glasses that have open eyes like printed on them.
Oh yeah, and sometimes they're like a little hologram, and when you turn your head, they wink.
Yeah. Yeah, be like, excuse me, sir, that woman is asking you to stop winking at her.
See, my luck, if I was blind, I would get some of those, and I would go to use them to freak people out, and then someone would have to explain to me, like, no, you got ripped off. They sold you regular glasses.
Well, here's the deal. My kids, we went to mass this morning. We were leaving, and there's a man with a glass eye, and it wasn't a good one. This is a vintage glass eye, and my youngest remarked very loudly about it, and I had to explain to my two children, like, what is a glass eye, and why do you have a glass eye? And so they had all these follow-up questions, and then I realized, so there's like two famous people with glass eyes. I have more people in my life with glass eyes than all of Hollywood.
Hold on. You're not including the guy you just saw randomly. That doesn't count as someone in your life, does it?
No.
Okay, so you have two additional people at least. Or three.
Yes. Yeah.
3 additional people with glass eyes.
Yeah. When I was growing up, one of my closest friends, his mom had a glass eye because when she was a kid, she got shot in the eye. Why are you laughing?
I just love a good blinding story, you know? I'm a sucker for a good blinding story.
Yeah, and then my cousin has a glass eye. He was a baseball player, and he was like, from what I understand, all my cousins are way older than me. Like my cousins' children's, they're my age. Does that make sense?
Your cousin's children's are your age.
Children. I meant to say children, not children.
Okay. And those are your first cousins once removed?
Yeah, I think that is first cousin once removed. And so, but anyway, my cousin was like a baseball star. Like this dude was going places, but then he got hit in the eye with a baseball, and now he has a glass eye. So right there.
It'd be weird if he got hit with a different kind of ball.
Yeah,
if he got hit with a football.
My groin!
Yeah, that would be that'd be kind of even more of a piss off, I think.
Or imagine the embarrassment if you got hit by like a wiffle ball.
Oh yeah, like a mad ball.
Yeah,
ooh.
Mad ball.
He probably would have been fine if he got hit with the mad ball because they're foam.
Yeah. Oh yeah, certainly. I think most of those balls you would be fine with. I think baseball is just like so horrible. Kirby Puckett, famous dude who played for the Minnesota Twins, he got hit in the face with a ball and it ended his career.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's like it's no joke, dude.
They should wear face protection.
Yeah, why don't they?
Because it's America.
Dude, know what's funny though is that like Americans, like we get upset, and this is obviously I'm speaking generally about myself and like 10 other people. Like when safety measures are enacted, I start humrumping But usually I think they're pretty reasonable. I just don't want them. I don't know. Like my state makes me buckle up. It's against the law for me to not wear a seatbelt.
I mean, it's been against the law to not wear a seatbelt in Canada for like most of my life, so I haven't really thought about that too much.
Isn't it oppressive though?
I mean, it's a safety concern, I think, for yourself and for others. So
No, just for you. That's the thing.
no, because if you go
for you.
flying out the window, you might like burst through someone's chest like it's Alien or something.
Oh, jeez, dude.
And
Come
also,
on.
that's bad for the person, like someone who's involved in like a car accident with you, because then it becomes like fatal, which affects them. Like that would affect you more in the States, right? Because like, can't you be charged with like manslaughter for
You'd be
like car
sad.
accidents and stuff?
I don't know. I don't know what you can be charged with. All I know is that if you don't want to wear a seatbelt, Kyle, I support your decision.
I always wear my seatbelt.
That's why you wear glasses.
That's why I have a strap on my glasses. You nerd with your safety. The way you accept reasonable safety regulations.
All right, cut out everything about seatbelts. What's on your mind?
On my mind?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about Luciano Pavarotti. He's one of the three tenors.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about Lucky Luciano, the mobster.
No. Mostly I'm talking about the Pavarotti part of it, not the Luciano part so much. And I was just thinking as a kid, I had a vague idea who Pavarotti was, but that I conflated Pavarotti with the paparazzi. I thought they were the same thing. And, because you'd see like Pavarotti, he'd be like sort of portrayed in cartoons as like a joke, as like sort of the stereotypical opera guy.
Ready, Senor Beaverati?
I'm already, and the one, and the
But then, you also had this image of the paparazzi like jumping out of bushes and like upsetting celebrities. So that was kind of my framework. And so I was talking to my wife about it, and she pointed out that she conflated the two as well, but she never clued in to how paparazzi was referred to in the singular, as in the paparazzi.
Wait,
paparazzi.
no. A paparazzo, I think, is a singular. Paparazzi is a group of, just like graffiti and a graffito.
Yeah, but the sort of saying is like, the paparazzi. Like they're often referred to as that rather than
like
as individuals. It's like the media.
A singular
right?
group.
Yeah, it's like the blood-sucking media, right? Like, especially those that are into, like, celebrity culture and, like, snapping photos and going through your garbage and stuff like that.
Okay, I misunderstood.
But I did pick up on the singular. And so I think in my mind, I thought the Pavarotti was like the Pope or something. Like, it was like a title that someone could hold. And that it just so happened that when I was a kid, the current Pavarotti was just, like, completely out of control and just, like, constantly on all the tabloids or whatever. And, I kind of held that belief until one time I was in Brantford visiting my dad, and we ordered Panzerottis. Which I don't know if you have those there.
No,
it's like a calzone. It's kind of like a calzone, but they're deep fried. It kind of all came together. I was like, wait a second. Panzerotti, paparazzi, Pavarotti. And I think it took me a few more years to sort out what they all were, but I do recall that was the moment that like I realized they were all different things.
I just love the idea, this image I've just painted in my mind of a young Kyle Bridget, like sitting in front of the television and being like, Pavarotti has gone too far. We've lost a princess.
I think I'd figured it out by that point.
These sweet boys are without a mother because of Pavarotti.
Well, you know what else? I also thought Pavarotti was Dom DeLuise. I thought that was the same person. Because they just kind of looked alike. So, when you're a kid, you just got to kind of piece things together. And I don't know. I just thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah, you have to create your own meaning out of things a lot of times. Like you're just sort of like left to your own wonderings and like, well, how can I make sense of this?
Yeah, and you're constantly hearing like new words that you don't know the meaning to, and you're trying to sort of piece them together with context clues, and you can easily be, confused as to like how a word is pronounced or when a word has two meanings or sounds like another word.
Yeah. Yeah, what happens with music, right? Like people listen to the lyrics of songs and mishear I mean, just because they have like the context isn't there to what the singer is saying, the writer of the song. So they'll just be like, well, what would make sense? You know, like there's a bathroom on the right rather than there's a bad moon on the rise.
Yeah.
I'm
Or
not...
like I have a friend, I won't say who, but they thought that the lyrics to a Ballroom Blitz were Ballroom Place.
Yeah.
Ballroom Place.
Yeah. Well, damn, dude. You figured it out. You clued your wife in finally. You said that she just figured it out.
No, she had figured it out way, way before me, I think. But she just remembered that there was a period where she didn't know the difference between the two. I'm sure she was much younger than me.
I am like very curious if there's anything like that from when I was a kid. Oh, actually there is one. Do you... Well, this isn't the same thing. This is just me being an idiot. Never, I strike it from the record. I can't reveal this. It's not analogous. Move on, please.
Okay, all right.
Let's get Yeti to Rumble Department.
Quiet. You want to get sued by Michael Buffer?
All right, I'm sorry.
We have to say it so we could never be accused of ripping him off. So let's go. Let's get Yeti to Rumble Department. That's the same thing. I don't know how to do it any other way.
Let's get ready to... Wait, Yeti. Shit.
Also, is that the national anthem?
Yeah.
Or is that anthem? Do you guys have like two? You have like two
yeah,
anthems,
no, that
right?
was the national anthem.
And then there's like It's a Grand Old Flag or something.
No, you're thinking of America the Beautiful? I don't know. Who cares? Thomas Jefferson isn't going to sue us. So we can use the national anthem. So.
He can. He's public domain.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, so you wanted to do Bigfoot. I wanted to do Crumb. So this was the perfect compromise. And we're looking at the 1971 comic Whiteman Meets Bigfoot from Homegrown Funnies, which was published by Kitchen Sink.
Yes. Now this is, aside from Genesis, this is like the first Robert Crumb comic that I've ever read.
Okay. This is one of his best loved comics.
Yeah.
It's not one of my favorites, but it is definitely one of his longest. Prior to making this, he had done a book called Augie and the Beanstalk in 1963, which I have right here, but it's under a pile of books. It'll make a bunch of noise if I go to grab it. And that was like 150 pages or something. It was like a full story. He made it when he was like 18. And he basically did it to pick up a girl. But then after that, he didn't make another long story until like the 90s, basically. So most of his comics are like about half as long as this or shorter.
Yeah. So having never like read an issue like of any of his comics, I sort of assumed it would be like a 1-page thing or like 3 pages maximum. And I have kind of read, just by virtue of like watching your videos about the characters that you do on your channel. But yeah, I was surprised at the length as I was reading it. I was like, God damn, I thought this was going to be like, I thought it'd be done.
Well,
right now.
yeah. So first of all, the book that this is in, Homegrown Funnies, is one of the more successful underground comic books. It had 16 printings and sold like over 160,000 copies, which I think is like, the numbers are lower in the underground market than they are in like the sort of mainstream market. And yeah, so this was a follow-up to Whiteman, which was a 4-page comic, which you've probably seen my video on, which was in Zap #1, which is like the original underground comics book that started it all. And in that 4-page comic titled Whiteman, A Story of Civilization in Crisis, Whiteman is a repressed and constipated Depression-era salesman, and he struggles to maintain his sort of like alpha male composure, you know, against his own illicit desires of sex and violence. And then he encounters a parade of black people, or rather like blackface stereotypes in the like a neo-1930s revival style, who humiliate Whiteman and sort of challenge his attitudes of white superiority. And it ends with Whiteman indecisive about whether or not he'll join the parade. And I guess if you want to do like a woke reading of it, you would say that it's about like the prevailing attitudes of like supremacy and toxic masculinity, especially in the context of like the civil rights movement leading up to the Fair Housing Act, which came out just shortly after that comic came out.
Being educated in Crumb via you, I was trying to, like, after I read through it, I was thinking, like, is there subtext to this story?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of subtext.
Yeah, like intentional subtext, or a subtext, like you were saying, like through a modern eye, apply meaning where there was not intended meaning.
Well, Crumb isn't a very intentional artist, right? Like he's working in a very sort of spontaneous and sort of like subliminal way. But I think even doing that, even if it's not intentional, you do reveal things about like your place and time in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think you can still apply those readings. And I think they still fit. But it's really about his father, right? Like Charles Crumb Sr., who basically was Whiteman. And he was, you know, an especially brutally masculine former Marine with a very severe attitude, you know, who was rendered pathetic by his like crazy amphetamine-addled wife and his wimpy sons, and a world that, you know, couldn't care less about his efforts. And, you know, I think that's something, like he says in the documentary, if you see the Crumb documentary, he says that's something he realizes years later. And so, you know, he was unconsciously doing this comic about his father, but his father was that Depression era guy who was paranoid about black people moving into the suburbs, you know, like all of that is in there. So it's like you can sort of pick all this stuff out, and it's very interesting, you know, to read in the way that he like composes a story. But this story would be a little bit harder, Whiteman Meets Bigfoot, the sequel, because it's like it is a much more involved story that obviously like Crumb is really into the structure of and like trying to tell a story from beginning to end. And I guess if our idiot listeners want to learn more about Whiteman Part 1, they should check out my YouTube video, Canonically Crumb number 7, which covers that comic in detail.
Mm-hmm. Most certainly. Well, okay, like let's get into this, because not only is there subtext for his father and the prevailing cultural, what is that called? Ethos at the time. Yeah, but there's also some really good Bigfoot lore that he has put in here too.
He's very into like Bigfoot and UFOs. He's anti-vax, but he's anti-vax from the left. Because that's how they are in France. In France, you're anti-vax from the left, and in North America, you're anti-vax from the right.
Well, no, that's like a new thing. In North America, it was like the whole woo movement, right? Like those.
It was more of a left-wing thing there, but it's still like that in France.
Yeah, but okay. So what was super cool though is like, I don't know, I'm a sucker for like the lettering. So like the white man looking like a Winnebago logo, and then the Bigfoot like all hairy and smelly, and there's like little moles and warts drawn in with the flies and the stink. It's like, what a cool title. I mean, like it's just like, and you also have this like cool like angle shot, I don't know, 3/4 view of a Winnebago, you know, driving down the highway. And
which is very ambitious for him, I would say. Like he's normally not so, like he doesn't normally take the most like complex sort of imagery like that, where it's like a big perspective shot or something. But he does like old cars and big cars with angles and stuff like that. So you do see that a lot. But you'll see like the other times that he looks at cars and stuff in it, it's always like usually a front view, you know, or like a side view.
There were a few panels though, like this one, where it's like it seems really cool, like the composition of it. I took note of. It was I think the next one, it's on the next page actually. It's the campsite with a line of different types of motor homes or trailers along, you know, the RV park, divided by the trees with all these like really cool little details.
Yeah. So it starts off, you've got Whiteman and his wife, Louise. They've got a new Winnebago. It's like, actually, I looked it up. It's actually like the 1971 Winnebago, which is like a real status symbol for like sort of middle class suburban men in the like 1971. It's like the Cadillac. And even as he's driving by someone in a car, they say, geez, oh, what a rig. Lucky guy. Although it is revealed that it's bought on credit too, right? So there's like there's a bit of a commentary on this. And then when they get to the trailer park, it says like they hook up his campsite in one of America's great national forests, but it looks just like the suburbs, right? Like, and that's the thing about camper culture is like you're replicating the suburbs, just in a slightly more, aesthetically natural looking environment,
Yeah, well, and then you further that message with like, well, where are the kids? Watching TV. He has to like coax and cajole them out of the RV, and like, his daughter's like, just wait till Mission Impossible's over. It's one of the absurdities of modern camping.
Yeah. But it would have been especially more novel then. But yeah, so he convinces them to come into the woods, and the kids are kind of start having fun. They're looking for Bigfoot. And it says, yes, the abominable snowman, sometimes called Yeti. They're supposed to live in these parts. And Whiteman kind of laughs at them. But then he loses sight of him, and he gets lost in the woods, and he actually gets grabbed by a Sasquatch who throws him in a sack and just absconds into the mountains with him.
I want to go back because there's something like kind of sweet and innocent that's like, you have all these, I don't know, maybe like cynical or like biting views of like the modern family camping, right? Like you were saying, the creation of the suburbs in the forest, the children who are inside watching television while at a national park. But then it's like he gets them out and they're running off. They're like, we don't want to go back. We want to go find Yeti. We want to go and play, and like this return of innocence.
Yeah, and I think that is like kind of foreshadowing a little bit what's going to happen in the story as well. And the kids are named Dick and Jane too, which is like a clear reference, to like the sort of American dream or whatever, like sort of traditional suburban white family. So Bigfoot takes him to the tribe in the mountains, and there's all these Sasquatch sitting around him. Mm-hmm. And Whiteman's cold, and they all just kind of like laugh at him and mock him and fart in his general direction. And he's clearly scared.
The turn that this comic takes so quickly it's jarring. Like I had to look over my shoulder, make sure my parents weren't walking in on me.
Yeah, it does get pretty graphic right away. So there's a female Bigfoot who gets referred to as Yeti with 2 T's. And so she sort of presents herself in a sort of mating position. She basically shoves her like giant ass right in his face and like sits right on his face. It's pretty extreme, I guess. There's a lot of juices involved.
Yeah, bro, I'm blushing just from you describing this.
If you've ever watched a nature documentary, it's basically that. And so Whiteman's like, not in a good way. And
he's being waterboarded.
Yeah, basically. But the Bigfoot who took him gives Whiteman to Yeti as her mate. And so it says the family says goodbye, and the newly wedded couple goes off to make their own nest. And she begins building a shelter out of tree branches, and he tries to make his escape, but she can easily catch up to him because she's like 9 feet tall and athletic, I guess.
She's a great ape of North America. Yeah,
and she's very ape-like here. She swings in a tree and grabs him with her giant legs, and she's like nibbling on his ear. She thinks he's cute. And then back in the nest, she gives him some roots to eat, and he can't eat them, so she chews them up for him. She's a very supportive wife.
She is. That's like, I was struck by that. It's like she's doing it all. She's R-ing him. She's building a nest. She's masticating his food. Like she is providing in every possible way.
Yeah, she's taking this relationship seriously. And then she falls asleep with a big fart and a big burp. And Whiteman contemplates escape, but it's freezing cold. It's pitch black. He figures he'll just die in the woods if he tries to. So he climbs up on her because she's nice and warm. And so he's right up on her ass. And be more comfortable, he takes his pants off. But he finds himself becoming tumescent. He finds himself becoming aroused to his own horror, and they end up making love.
Making whoopee. Now, you know what, like, it reminded me of? It was like I had like a flashback of like embarrassment as I read this, because this reminds me of like the type of fever dream you would have as a young man, like a young pubescent man, like fantasies of like, yeah, and then I'll be hanging out with this girl, and then like, I don't know, she'd like and then we'd like cuddle, and then next thing I know, we'd be having sex. It'd be great.
Yeah, she'd be stuck in a window. Like,
wait, cut this out.
We're doing something, all our clothes fall off, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like just some series of events that are just so absurd that would lead to me losing my virginity. Like that was the thing. To cut the part about it reminded me of that as a kid, and like that's what it is. Like he illustrating that in the story perfectly.
Yeah, I think that is part of it, for sure. And then so 6 weeks pass, and, Whiteman has totally adapted. He refers to Yeti as Yeti, my love. He was wasting his life working for General Dynamics. And, it's all meaningless, and, it's a simpler way of life. And, it's not so hard once you learn how to survive out here. And he just loves it. And it feels like it's been years.
Which is not something that you would normally describe a positive experience, right? It's been years. It's been a mere 6 weeks, but I feel like it's been years.
But he describes it as like time's lost meaning, right? Like, so it doesn't matter anymore because like time, that's sort of a constraint of, like being an indoor cat or something, right? Where it's like, if you're an indoor cat, it's all about time, right? Like, at this time I get my food, at this time I get this, at this time I get that,
Yeah.
Whereas like if you're an outdoor cat, it's all about space. And it's like, oh, I'll go over here and then I'll go over there. And
and then I find a little mouse and I'll eat it.
Yeah.
But this is where I'll push back, because what does he do immediately after he gives this speech about time losing meaning and this is the best experience of his life and he realizes his life is a waste? Hey, let's go back to civilization.
That's true. But he does seem to say he wants to see his family, he wants to tell them about us. I want you to come with me. Like he basically wants to be like, I want this to be legitimized, I think. I think he's sort of lost his mind and he kind of thinks he can have the best of both worlds. Like he can like come back and just like leave his wife and his kids won't hate him and he can, live with Bigfoot.
No, it won't.
That's definitely how I read it. I do see what you're saying about like how it's weird that like, usually time goes slower when you're not having fun. But I think it's more supposed to be like time has lost meaning. Because the way he says it is like, it's been a long time since your dad put me in that sack and brought me here to be your mate. God only knows how long. I've lost track of time. Seems like years. And so I think it's like this idea of like, you lose the markers of time. Like, that's why prisoners like carve numbers on the wall or whatever. So it's like you can keep track of how many days. Well, I mean, now they're probably allowed to have calendars. But like, if you were like trapped somewhere and time had no meaning, you would probably start doing that pretty quick.
Yeah, I bet I would.
Like as soon as you figured out you were losing track of time, you would try to make your best guess and then go from there,
Yeah.
So anyway, they decide to just go walking, and they eventually stumble across a hunting party of like very white man-esque people.
Yeah.
Men. And he tries to say, oh, it's so good to see human beings. And they're like, he's a maniac, get him. They like tackle him to the ground. And then Yeti comes in to save him. And she starts like, throwing people around. And there's even one guy who's crawling around saying, my teeth, where's my teeth? He's lost his dentures. And Whiteman's trying to calm her down. But before he can, someone hits her in the back of the head with a thock with an axe. And she's knocked unconscious.
This part is actually kind of disturbing to me. It's like...
It's brutally violent.
Yeah. Well, and you see, as the story goes on, like, he's trying to impress upon them, like, I'm a normal human man, and I'm just trying to get back to civilization. And this is my lover, my snowman lover. But they're just like, nope, tying her up, restraining him too, and just being like, I don't know, just talking down to him the whole time. And
well, they're gonna kill her. Like he's like, one of them's got his rifle. He's like, I'll take care of this thing. And then he basically like puts upon him that like she's valuable. They're like, oh, okay, we like this. And so they tie her up and they take him and Yeti to the ranger station. The ranger says, oh, you look like one of them hippies, and gets him to get cleaned up and dressed. And then Yeti is sent to be in like captivity for scientific study.
Yeah.
And you can see there's a lot of regret in Whiteman's face during this whole scene. He's explaining what he did, and he's like, it might have been the wrong idea. I don't know. I'm confused. Yeah, and then so as he's being taken home in their big car, his wife Louise says, your job might still be waiting for you. I called your boss, and he said for you to come in and talk when you're ready.
He ain't ready.
No, and 2 weeks pass, and he's just moping around watching TV. His wife is like getting on his case now, and she's like, when are you going to be ready, Mr. High and Mighty, for Christ's sakes? You think you're a big man just because you got your name in the paper?
This is my favorite part, though. The telephone rings, and she picks up the phone. It's for you, big shot. Probably another magazine or something. And so Whiteman answers, he goes, hello? He goes, Mr. Whiteman? Yes. This is my favorite part of the whole thing. This is Dr. Grayface at the Federal Abominable Snowman Research Center. I know you. You got Yeti in that place.
And so they ask Whiteman to come in and take a look because she's depressed too. And he shows up and they're like saying, oh, we can't get her to eat. What does she eat? And he's like, oh, you know, she likes acorns and leaves and ferns and roots out of the ground. And he's like, thanks, this is good information. And then he wants to see her. He's like, can I see her? And Dr. Grayface is like, I don't know. You know, that's weird. Come back in a week. And he's like, a week? No, don't you understand? She's mine. She's my mate. That Yeti woman is my mate. She was given to me by her own father. I want to see my mate right now, right this goddamn fucking minute. And like, he's like throttling Dr. Grayface, who's like, okay, right this way, Mr. Whiteman. They let him into Yeti's cage, which is like very depressing.
Oh, yeah.
And they lock the door behind and they say that we got to get that white man under psychiatric care immediately. I'm afraid this whole experience with the snowman has had a traumatic effect. He shall prove a most interesting case study, I dare say. Mm-hmm. So these bureaucrat scientists, they don't have any moral compunction.
Dude, they're heartless.
Yeah. And so you see Yeti in there and she's like sitting in the corner and it's just like a prison cell. And Whiteman comes up to her and he says, it's me, your own true mate. You remember me, don't you?
At last, my love has come along.
And she does, and they start getting down to business again. The oral persuasion. And then the doctors come and says, okay, Mr. Whiteman, it's time to go now. Let's go. And he's like, no, go away. Leave us alone. And they try to take him, but then Yeti basically like pushes past the guards, grabs Whiteman, and they like bound across the city, jumping on like car roofs and stuff.
Dude, that panel at the bottom where it's like where they're leaving the facility and she's sort of like he draws Yeti as like coming out of the panel, like going through the gutters into the next panel even. And then the next one is her like leaping from car to car. And I don't know, there's something like visually about that just looks so cool. And the way like has the cars drawn and she's denting the roofs as she just hops along is just, I don't know, visually it's pretty amazing. I like it.
It's also really reminiscent of like the sort of like funny animal and humor comics of like the 1950s that he grew up reading. So his older brother, Charles Jr., basically was obsessed with comics. And so he made his like brothers and sisters make comics all day and like study comics. And he was like a real like taskmaster about it. And so when it comes to Crumb, like there are a lot of like little things that are just always working like that, where it's like he's breaking through the panel at the exact right space, even though like, especially at this stage, the artwork isn't as like, you know, technically impressive as it would become.
Yeah.
It's like, he's got the language down and it reads very well. Like it's very easy to read and it has a real like kind of professional quality, you know, like he could have been doing like kids comics in the 50s if he wasn't such a sex pervert, you know?
Yeah. Wait, so how early was this in his career?
So this is in 71. I don't remember all the dates, but so like in the early 60s, he starts working for American Greeting Company.
Okay. And
at first he works in the like the color separation department, and then he gets moved into like the highbrow cards department, and he's making cards. And for like the next, like for the rest of the 60s, basically, he's working for them off and on. It's like he's even like he's in Europe and he's working for them. He's in different cities working for him. It seems like he talks about it like it's a nightmare, but it actually sounds like a pretty sweet gig where it's like he can just make a living like drawing greeting cards anywhere he goes.
Yeah.
But he hates it. So he does that, and then he starts making Fritz the Cat and stuff in sort of the mid 60s. Like he'd been making Fritz the Cat when he was a kid, but the Fritz the Cat that you know, like he starts making those comics in the mid 60s. He gets some of those in Help.
Okay.
And then he starts doing stuff for like newspapers, like underground newspapers in like 66, 67. And then 68, that's when Zap #1 comes out, which features Keep On Truckin'.
Mm-hmm.
that comic, and he basically becomes an overnight sensation after that. And so this is in 71. This is sort of like the initial fame period has sort of like lost its appeal to him.
Yeah.
Like he's making a living off of his comics, but he's also kind of like, he hates fame. He's moved out to like the country, and so it's lost a lot of its luster.
Okay.
And so I think some of that's in here. So I think things like when he's talking about the company, whatever it was called, let's see,
General
what was
Dynamics.
Yeah, General Dynamics. You know, I feel like that's like almost like a stand-in for American Greetings.
Okay.
You know, when he's when he's like getting out to the country and stuff, it's like he's sort of getting away from fame. The fame doesn't do anything for him. He's depressed and he's like at home. You know, it's like the fame's kind of like a curse. So I think some of that is in here that sort of like meets that attitude at that he had at this time in 1971. Let's see. So he's 25 when Zap came out. So he'd be like 28 right now. 27 or 28. So the two lovers find refuge in an old abandoned warehouse, and Whiteman managed to get some clothes for her, which is like, I like the joke where he's like, "I'm back, my sweet. Sorry I've gone so long. I had to hunt all over the city. I spared no expense, only the best for my Yeti." And it's like he got like giant like boots for her and like designer clothes instead of like the trope where it says you steal them off like a clothesline or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I
like,
also like what he says. I told the tailor I have a daughter who's big for her age. Like, why not say my wife? I need it for my wife. No, I just have a giant daughter.
So he dresses her up in like boots that clop. I think that's a sexual thing for him. I think he's really into like legs and boots and stuff. So I think that clop is like something that's like a sound that's like erotic to him, I think. And then he's sort of like walking through a city with this giant woman, and I think she's supposed to be coded as like black. I think there's like a kind of like racial element here as well, like it's sort of like interracial element. And I think that is one of the more sort of like troubling aspects of this story that sort of ties into the first Whiteman, where it's like, you know, almost like the noble savage or something. Where it's like the inverse of the white man's burden, where it's like actually like black people are more connected to nature or whatever, you know, because the implication being that they're not as civilized or something. And so there's like kind of something exotic about it. And he kind of like is seduced by that. So I do think that's a little bit under the surface. I don't know how intentional that is. Anyway, so he walks to the city, brings her back to the house, and then he's shoving her into the Winnebago. And this is what we were talking about earlier about getting stuck in a window, which is a recurring fantasy of Crumb's. And it's just like her ass and her giant legs sticking out of the Winnebago as it's toppling over.
Yeah.
It's a really animated scene. Like the Winnebago's coming down, they're trying to push it back up, and it like slams back just as like Louise comes out and says, "Just what in the hell are you think you're doing? And whose leg is that you're sitting on?" "Oh, that's a friend of mine." And she just says, "I wish you'd grow up." And she knows that he's running off with a Yeti. He's going to steal the beast. And she basically gives him like the business. Like she reads him the riot act and is like, "You're just going to abandon your kids, you piece of shit? Like, you're just going to go off and live in the woods like with this like wild animal or whatever." And, you know, he agrees. And he's like, "Oh my God." First he says, "I was hoping to avoid all this," which I think is pretty honest. He's kind of has a moral dilemma. And he's like, "She's right. I can't abandon my family. What'll I do?" But Yeti just grabs him and runs off and takes him to the woods and basically solves that for him. And he says, "Whew, that was easy." And then in the final panel, they're lying in a stream. Yeti's sort of like half in the stream and he's sort of sleeping on her. He's got a handful of tit. And it says, "And so Bigfoot took Whiteman back to the woods where they lived happily ever after."
I want to go back before I make a comment of the whole thing. When he's shoving her into the Winnebago, there's something so cool about those panels. You were talking about how animated they were. And throughout all of the panels, like most of them, the entirety of the Winnebago isn't visible. So it's like, it's all this, like this wall, just like the angle of it changing and their posture changing. And there's something like really cool about that, like keeping it so tight in that it like really conveys the amount of motion in a way that I wouldn't have thought it would.
Yeah, because it's not like you don't get to see the RV like tipping back and forth. You only see a very small portion of it. And he very smartly keeps, like, he doesn't really change the perspective for most of it. For like at least the first 3 panels of it, it's like the exact same view. So you can really see the shift in the thing. The one of the panels is a little bit more from the front, but for the most part, it's like the same sort of thing. And then when it crashes, you've got his wife standing in the foreground, sort of menacingly. And so it's a really good sequence for sure.
And you have the wheels splayed out sideways.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's so great. All right, so where do you place this comic among the oeuvre of Robert Crumb?
Well, I mean, this is sort of like, so with Robert Crumb, he has sort of different periods. So in around like 1970 is sort of the end of the happy hippie period. He gets a little sick of the hippies, and he kind of gets this attitude of like, well, I'm just going to put all my sickest sex fantasies out there, and if people like it, they like it, and if they don't, they can get out. And so this is even kind of just after that initial period, and this is just before Fritz the Cat cartoon came out,
The motion
and just
picture.
before he killed off Fritz the Cat following that.
Okay. Like, where does this rank for you?
I think in terms of like his significant output, like in terms of individual stories, this is up there because it's one of the longest stories. Like,
Yeah.
not counting Genesis as part of his canon, because it's more like an illustration job. It's like he's got this, he's got Cave Wimp, and then he's got Mystic Funnies #1 and Mystic Funnies #2. And other than like he did a weekly strip of Mr. Natural that was an ongoing narrative,
Yeah.
very few of his comics are this long. This is about twice as long, or 3 times as long, or even 4 times as long as most of his comics. So I think this is a very important one. And also, this one had a huge cultural impact compared to a lot of his other comics. So beginning in the sort of like mid 70s, there was an attempt to make a screenplay, and Crumb made some production art in 77 in order to make a film adaptation of this.
Yeah.
And then that sort of fell through. And then there was a stage production of the film done by the Del Art Players Group, which toured California in the 1980s. And it was very successful, but it was kind of too risque for sort of general consumption.
Yeah.
I've actually you can see it on the archive. There's a video recording of it. I think there's like even like nudity in it and stuff.
Nice.
Speaking of nudity, then the Mitchell brothers wanted to make a big budget, like $1 million porno version, an adaptation of it in the early 80s that would be directed by Robert Crumb's friend, Terry Zwigoff. And Crumb was writing the screenplay for it. But they pulled out of the script. They pulled out when they saw the script and realized that nobody was going to want to jerk off to this thing.
No. God, no.
But the Mitchell brothers are kind of interesting. By all accounts, they were scumbags, like total scumbags.
Yeah.
They owned a bunch of strip clubs, and they produced some of the bigger porno films of the sort of porno chic wave in the 70s, including Behind the Green Door and Autobiography of a Flea. Those are like 2 of the bigger ones. And they sort of ended their run when Jim, because it was Jim and Artie Mitchell, and Jim killed Artie, went to jail.
Oh, geez.
So they were quite the characters.
Doesn't bode well for those other sibling director pairs. Wachowski sisters, Farrelly brothers. Yeah.
Menendez brothers.
They didn't direct anything.
No, that's true. But they were rich.
Yeah, good point. This is a fascinating first dive into Robert Crumb. And I asked you at the beginning, I was like, is there any subtext? I mean, it's like now, like reading it a second time, like as I was during, like as we were going through it, I mean, it's like rife for interpretation. Like there's so many little details, putting aside like what you know about his upbringing and his family, right? Like if you put aside the connection to his parents and their relationship, like there's just so much that you can read into what on its face seems like a simple sex pervert comic.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's very interesting about Crumb, is that he's working on all these levels. So when you read one of his comics, there's like this sort of surface level of like, wow, this is just ugly, or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like, this is just shocking, or this is just violent. But then it's like, there's always another sort of interpretation. And then often if you really dig into it, you find out that there's a much more personal interpretation that you would never even know unless you were like totally like mired in Crumb. So like for this one, after the Mitchell brothers pulled out of making a film, Terry Zwigoff, who really wanted to be a filmmaker, convinced Crumb to finish the screenplay, and then they put it together as like a treatment, and they were shopping it around Hollywood in the like early 80s, and they basically stopped when Harry and the Hendersons came out.
There has been yet another sighting of the creature that some people are now calling Harry.
Harry? Since when does he have a name?
Since right now.
The average American family just got bigger. Harry and the Hendersons.
And Zweigoff was so depressed by basically missing his shot that Crumb agreed to being filmed for what became the 1995 documentary Crumb.
Oh, wow.
So this is like kind of important in that sort of sense too, because like so much of Crumb's work since then is so much defined by that movie, making him like even more of a household name. And so what's funny about when you read about them trying to turn that into a movie is that at every stage, writing a screenplay here, making the porno, whatever, Crumb's question is constantly, who are they going to get to play Yeti? He just like, he's obsessed with that. And he talks about it like when he's talking about working for the Mitchell brothers, he's like, that's all I cared about. I was just so excited to see what giant hairy woman were they going to get to play the Yeti. He was so excited about it. And when he talks about the play, he hears that the play's going to happen. He's like, I was so excited. I was like, who are they going to get to play it? And then I was a little disappointed to find out that it was a guy in a giant costume. But, the play was still good. But
Dude, I have a question. Like, do you think he has gone, for lack of a better term, ape over like modern women?
Oh, because like the big butts and stuff.
Yeah, and they modify their body in ways that it's like the thighs and the ass are just so pronounced.
Yeah, you can pick up stuff like Art and Beauty, because he doesn't do a lot of comics anymore, but he does a lot of fine art drawings. And he's like really into like the big butts. So I think there's some like Kim Kardashian and stuff in there. I do have a quote about what he thought of the Yeti. This is from our Crumb Conversations. Angel Food McSpade was a goddess.
Christ.
A vision of perfect, primitive sexuality. The Yeti, in Whiteman Meets Bigfoot, is a further development of this theme. The lusty Amazon sex goddess who lives naked in the jungle. You figure it out. One of the first females I ever fantasized heavily about at the age of 12 was Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, from the TV show. Man, she was tough. And so I think what you were talking about earlier about this being a sort of a childhood sex fantasy, I think that was very astute. And I think that was a real launching point for this comic.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, that's precisely what I was talking about. Yeah. Like that 12-year-old thought of like, I just saw an image on television. Now this is going to be like permeate my thoughts every night until a new image replaces it. I will say, as an aside, I don't even know if I can say the name, but Angel Food, that name is still so shocking to me.
She's a shocking character.
Well, she appears in this issue, and it was like I read that one too, and it was like, dude, it's a lot. And
Is that the flood with the Snoid?
Yeah, I grew up with family members who like dealt in antiques. And so like I was exposed to a lot of, I guess like the term is Black Americana, where you have like these portrayals of African Americans with, the big red lips and all of those cartoonish features that Angel Food has.
Yeah. But
it's like to see it illustrated, like in personified in that way, it makes me uncomfortable.
It's very shocking. So the way I sort of think about it is that early on in his career, I think what Crumb was doing was kind of taking these images and shoving them in your face and implicating you in the transgression. Because, these sort of like open depictions of like bigotry and racism had kind of gone out of vogue, right? Like for the most part. And like it was kind of a thing that wasn't talked about anymore, but like everybody knew growing up because you watch these cartoons and in every cartoon, like an explorer ends up in the pot of a bunch of cannibals or something, it's still there. And so his sort of genesis for making like Zap and stuff, it came out of like an LSD, right? He was doing these LSD trips and his brain, if you've ever done LSD, it's like you just kind of like vomit up all of this, detritus that's in your brain, like every cartoon theme song that's just burned into your brain that you don't think about. It's all just swirling around in there. And so he ends up creating this sort of like style that plays on these cartoons from the 30s that he was really into. And, you know, that's been done a million times since. But people actually have this as like a roadmap for what not to do when you're doing that, right? Like Cuphead is just as much playing on that, but their use of ethnic stereotypes is much more like subtle, right?
Yeah.
So, but you could still criticize them for things like they have like a King Dice character or whatever that's like sort of based on, what's his name? Cab Calloway. You know, they've sort of learned how to work around that, and people understand how to read it more. So I think that's part of it, is that he's kind of like blazing the way for this neo-30s revival. And then I think he's also like just not censoring himself. And I think early on he uses it, sometimes anyway, effectively. Like in Whiteman Part 1, I think it's justified use of those characters in that time and place, which is a world very different from ours. But I think as the 70s go on, he starts using them just to be an asshole, and he really does lose the thread. And by the 80s, he kind of stops drawing those characters altogether. He still does like comics that are considered racist and stuff sometimes, but like he doesn't tend to do like the full like blackface, big lips, minstrel style of drawing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think in here, this is like when he's approaching the point where it's like he doesn't really have a leg to stand on anymore.
Yeah.
But I don't know that like Yeti is that quite, because Yeti isn't like that kind of stereotype. It's more subtle that might be like a reading that you could have of it.
Yeah. When you were saying like that thing about like the noble savage, I could see that connection being made, but it's a far cry from what is in The Flood in the previous comic.
Yeah. And I think there's that comic's pretty bad. Like anything with the Snoid is pretty bad. Like the Snoid is like basically like the worst of inclinations of his id. So if the Snoid is there,
it's going to be fucked up.
It's almost always going to be fucked up in some sort of way, either like very rapey or like very racist or, you know, just generally hateful. And then that's kind of what that character kind of takes over as you get to like the late 70s. And it's called the Season of the Snoid. And it's like, that's when he's at his worst, I think, in terms of like racist imagery and stuff.
Okay.
But, you know, I think people can kind of make mistakes, and he stopped doing it, you know, so good for him. But I think there's another reading of this, and that's it. In the first Whiteman comic, Whiteman represented his father, Charles Sr. But I think in Whiteman Meets Bigfoot, Whiteman actually represents Robert Crumb. And, you know, at the time that he makes this, he's living in this sort of really like hectic environment where he's living on this sort of commune where it's like his wife lives in one farmhouse on the property and he lives on a cabin on the property. And then also like his girlfriend lives in a trailer on the property. And there's a bunch of other crazy characters just like walking around. And, you know, he's constantly trying to like kind of run away from everything. He's kind of trying to run away from parenthood. He's trying to run away from being a husband. He's trying to run away from everything. And I think Whiteman Meets Bigfoot is kind of like that dream realized. And I think when you look at Whiteman Part 1 in 1968, Whiteman's sort of depicted as a much older man, you know?
Yeah.
It's like his father, right? In 1968. Whereas this is like Whiteman is like his age. And it's like him like trying to escape, you know, American greetings, which he was already away from, but he, you know, he had that experience. And he did abandon his wife. He like just met some people at a bar one day. He was living in, I think, Chicago or something. He just met some people in a bar one day and they're like, oh, we're going to San Francisco. Want to come? And he's like, yes. And he just like left and called his wife like 2 weeks later.
Oh my God.
And I think he had a son at that point too. So like he was really wanted to run away. And so I think that is kind of captured in here a bit.
Huh.
Anyway, that's Whiteman Meets Bigfoot. One of the best loved underground comics of all time.
Yeah, it was a pretty delightful first introduction to Robert Crumb.
That might have not been my first suggestion for an introduction. I don't know. But I think it is a good story. It's definitely one of the better examples of storytelling because normally it is just kind of quick stream of consciousness type stuff that just kind of like usually just fizzles out in the end. And this really has a beginning, a middle, and end.
Yeah.
And it's a good story, I think. And, you know, it became Harry and the Hendersons, so.
I give it 3.5 quarts. Are we doing that right now?
3.5 quarts of Yeti juice. Which is at least that. There's at least that in this.
First I was cowboy and then a guru priest. Any little thing that'll keep my palm greased. Wear a white leather suit and bubble-toed shoes. Got a $50,000 a year case of the blues. Baby, I'm a fine artist, and maybe I deserve to be kissed.
Here we are in the tips for twits department.
Hey, I got something on my mind.
You have a tip?
Something that I think you would like. It's called Before Mickey Mouse, A History of American Animation. And I found it was recommended to me on HBO Max. And it's pretty fascinating. I don't even know how they got this or something, because it seems like very not mainstream. So I was surprised to see it on HBO. But it was shot on 16 millimeter black and white. It's got like a little voiceover and everything. It was made in 1982, and it's about an hour long. And the guy who made it is named Ronald Schwarz. And as the name implies, he's looking at American animation before Mickey Mouse. So before
When's
like
Mickey Mouse come about? Like 1925, 1926?
Shit, I should have looked that up.
I think that is because they keep extending the copyright.
Yeah, and it's I didn't know that much about animation, or at least the history of it. My window of animation is like knowing that, I guess it would be like things like Disney and how they did things, right? So you would have the painted background, and then they would have the cells that they put on, and they paint the characters each time on the cell. And I understood that concept. And what was so fascinating about this was to see them start really right at the beginning of it. And the beginning of it was
Gertie the dinosaur.
Well, no, before that even. It started with just...
Well, film is like animation, like the great train robbery or whatever, the train coming at you. It's like, it is kind of like animation. It's the same process as animation. It's just those are done with photos, basically.
Yes. The animation aspect of movies began with the advent of movies. And so exactly what you're saying, right? Like you have just like moving pictures. It's a series of individual images put together to convey motion. And so that's what they were doing. But it was, they would be like hand drawn, right? So it would draw with chalk, like a picture, and then they would have to erase it. And then they take the next photo, draw it slightly differently, or maybe leave part of it up and then redraw it. And so they're like these rudimentary flip books, basically. And then they go through and
so they're looking at like thaumatropes and zoetropes and all those.
They do talk about that, but that's not. That's more of like pre-animation, right? The zoetrope.
That's like pre-film, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like it's a circle, and then the last image like feeds right into the first image. It's a GIF, really. But anyway, what's the most fascinating part is just learning about how each of those elements that allowed a company like Disney to take over animation, how they were, sussed out and created by these individual creators. And a lot of times, like Gertie the dinosaur, it was this mix of footage of real people mixed in with animation, and, the artist himself being a character in it.
Fleischer did that a lot in the early ones, where it'd be like the pen dipping into the inkwell or whatever. But I think Disney was also doing like they're like Alice cartoons, where they had like a little girl who would go to these like sort of cartoon worlds. That was like, I think a Disney one. But Disney really did they got control of the narrative. That's why it's like you think animation starts with Disney, because that's how Disney presented it,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like, so each step of the way you have like this guy is like, all right, well, wait, what if we just made facsimiles of the background, and then we don't have to draw it again and again. We have it set. And then that transferred into painting the background and then doing the cells. And it's like, well, wait a second. If we do the cells, then we can hang it onto the background. And then that sort of eliminates another step. And like the two pegs, like some guy figured that out, and it became an industry standard. And it was just,
and at every stage, Disney said, I did that.
He did not do it. And I think like really I don't know that much about Disney really, except everything I know about animation is informed by what Disney did. But like the title of it, like Before Mickey Mouse, A History of American Animation, I think that title is just so important because it is like all of this stuff predates what Disney was doing tremendously. And these guys were doing amazing, amazing things. Like Gertie the Dinosaur, which you mentioned, is like a masterpiece. And it was
Yeah.
done in like the 20s or whatever. And it's like truly unbelievable.
And it's presented as a live stage show too. So it's like you have
Yes.
Winsor McKay there being like, come on out, Gertie. You know, like actually standing in front of a projected image of Gertie. And then
Yeah.
Gertie's coming out. So it's like, it's a really interesting kind of thing that you would never see anymore, except maybe at Disney World where you get like the combination live show with animation or whatever. Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's on HBO Max. And if you, like somebody like you who knows quite a bit about this history, a lot of this might be like kind of old hat for you. I like the aesthetic of it, having like it's film made in the early 80s. So it has like a really cool feel to it. Like this is just some guy making something in his basement because he loves the subject. But if you don't know anything about American animation before Mickey Mouse, this is truly a must watch. This is one, you can't talk me out of it like you did last week. This is a 4 quarts for sure.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds
Maybe
great.
even
I'm going to check it
more.
out.
Yeah. All right, what do you got?
I got a book. I got a book called Who Censored Roger Rabbit?
What?
So this is a book by Gary Wolfe from 1981 that was adapted into the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Although this bears very little resemblance to the actual film plot-wise.
Yeah.
And is very much an homage to like hard-boiled detective fiction in the 30s and 40s, you know, like Dashiell Hammett and especially Raymond Chandler. And you can really feel the love he has for comics in here, especially like newspaper comics. So instead of animated films like in the movie, the premise in this is it's mostly comics and they're photographs of the cartoons that are turned into these comics. And there's even like an art market for like the original photos. And he takes a lot of care to explain the mechanics of this world where toons and humans coexist. So like toons in the story have coexisted with humans since ancient times. And they were like the inspiration for fantastical creatures of myths and legends, fairies, and all that sorts of stuff. And they actually speak in word balloons, which are like these sort of like liquidy word balloons that appear above their head, and they can psychically project doppelgangers of themselves, which are like exact copies that are conscious and which kind of like unravel and fall apart after a while. But they use these doppelgangers to survive the crazy violence in the comics. And so the plot of this is that Roger Rabbit, he's a second banana comic character for the DeGreasy Brothers Syndicate. And he hires this handsome, square-jawed private eye, Eddie Valiant, to figure out why the DeGreasy Brothers have reneged on an agreement with Roger and why they refuse to let him out of his contract. So, you know, Eddie snoops around, he talks, you know, to Roger's much more successful co-star, Baby Herman, and his estranged wife, Jessica, who's more of a femme fatale in this and in the film. And she can't stand Roger. She fucking hates him, which is very different from the movie. And meanwhile, Roger's convinced that someone's going to try to kill him, but Eddie doesn't believe him. At least until he finds Roger's gruesome corpse shot dead along with his final word balloon, which suggests that someone was trying to censor Roger Rabbit. And it kind of goes on from there. Yeah, so this is kind of a hard one for me to rate because I really like this book. I've read it 3 times in the last like 12 years since whenever I got it. But it's not very well written.
Yeah.
You know, if you love the history of cartoons and comics, you're going to love this book because it's a very clever premise and Wolfe explains the world and its processes in interesting ways. But for me, the thing that hurts it is that love for hard-boiled fiction as well, which I'm also a huge fan. And while he does a good job of like mimicking the atmosphere and the plot structure of those books, he's just not as good when it comes to that sort of like ham-fisted dialogue that you get with like a Raymond Chandler, which works so well in those books, but it's kind of cheesy and grating in this book. It's au gratin, basically, this book.
What you were saying about like not being able to capture the actual tone of what he was inspired by, it's a shame, right? Because it's like if you really you would hope that he could do it because he loves it, right? And he wants to pay homage, and I would hope that if I try to pay homage to something, I could do it well. There's another medium that like people have recently tried to pick up on, but they fail in, I'm guessing, in a similar way. And that's like the radio play. And there was one of like the worst offenders, and I was so sad that this was the case, was there were these audio plays, these Batman audio plays. And what people failed to capture is that, like, in the old audio plays, they wouldn't describe the surroundings.
Yeah.
You as the listener got to create it yourself because of the sound effects that there were.
And the context clues in the dialogue as well probably helped.
Yes. Like, hey, just go grab one of those trash cans or something, like something even small like that. And you're like, oh, there's trash cans in the alley now. Oh, shit. Those weren't there before. Now I see them.
Yeah. And they would also be supported oftentimes by like newspaper comics or something like that.
Yeah.
That would like kind of like reinforce it.
Yeah. I think that they have appreciation for them, but they don't understand why they work. And so they just think, well, if I do this old voice, that'll be enough. And it's like, well, no, it's not enough because you're doing it fucking wrong.
I think Wolf knows what he's doing. I think he's just not a good enough writer to make it work.
Okay, yeah.
And so maybe if you weren't as familiar, like I've read every Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe novel, like I've read all the major Dashiell Hammett novels, like, so when he's kind of referencing those things, it's like, it's just falling short, and it's not like, it's just reminding you that he's not as good as them. And so I think that does hurt it. The other thing that hurts it is that this is one of those rare cases where the film adaptation is like technically much better than the book. Because the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit is perfect, right? Like it's the perfect movie.
It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. It's a masterpiece. And so I think that hurts it too, because you do want the book to be better. So I give it 3.5 liters of chicken fat. The thing to know, though, if you're going to go out and try to get it, is that Wolf has written 3 follow-ups, but they're not really sequels to the books. They're more influenced by the film. So there's Who Plugged Roger Rabbit from 1991, Who Whacked Roger Rabbit from 2013, and Jessica Rabbit, Serious Business. Serious spelled with an X. It's all capitals, Serious. So it must be like a company she works for. Apparently that one's about her getting into showbiz. And I haven't read any of those, so I don't know if they're any good. I don't have any real opinion on them. But if you're taking my tip, you don't want to be a twit and pick up the wrong book.
Yeah. All right. Hey, should we go on to our next department?
Let's do it.
Let's get ready to let her rip, department.
This is never going to be able to go up on the internet.
Hey, so, believe it or not.
Oh, I was going to say you can send us letters. Well, why don't you say what you're going to say, and then after you say that, I'll say you can send us letters.
I was going to say, believe it or not, we have 2 letters.
That's great. And you can send us letters at podrzebiepodcast@gmail.com. Please put idiot mail in the subject line. And please address us as Dear Idiots or Your Supreme Idiocy or something along those lines. And we'll read it on the air. Whatever it says. Anything.
Hey, no joke. I check this email account every day. All right? So I'd like to see the emails. Yeah, I get lonely. This first email is from Bridget O'Kyleson.
Oh.
Bridget O'Kyleson. Dear Idiots, I really enjoyed your podcast. I've even recommended it to my Austrian governess. But there's one thing that bothers me about your program. Why does Patty complain week after week about being co-idiot? You're going to make me read this?
Is there more?
Yeah, there is. Clearly, Kyle does the lion's share of the work, and the complaining merely interrupts the flow of the program. Couldn't Patty just accept his position in the Podrzebie hierarchy and keep it to himself? Sincerely, Bridget O'Kyleson, aged 6.
Wow. From the mouth of babes.
From the mouth of babes. What? Yeah. You know.
Well, that's a really nice letter. Thank you. Thank you, Bridget.
No, Bridget.
What?
Fuck you.
What do you?
And your Austrian governess, okay?
Listen. Look, they're just trying to give some helpful criticism. You got to be.
This was deconstructive criticism.
She could have been a little nicer, I think, but she's 6 years old. Give her a break. Come on.
Lion's share. I mean, listen, It just because it's true doesn't mean it needs to be said, okay?
That's true. I would never say that.
I appreciate that, Kyle. If you want to reply to Bridget, you can go to BridgetO'Kylson@gmail.com.
Hey, come on, don't give her her email. Come on. We'll have to bleep that out. We don't want to dox this poor girl. She's only 6 years old.
All right, so we have one other one. Hopefully this one won't upset me. This is from Lyle Bridginghamstein.
Wait, Lyle Bridginghamstein or Stein?
Stein?
Okay, hopefully we get
Well,
that right.
Steen, I don't know. It's hard to tell because sometimes same spelling is pronounced two different ways. All right.
There you go.
Dear idiots, I'm an 87-year-old veteran of the French Foreign Legion. I have thoughts about the French Foreign Legion, by the way. And a great fan of your fine program. It makes me laugh, think, and cry, as well as laughing until I cry and then thinking about it for a while. All right, I'm going to stop the voice. I really enjoyed the It's Rambling Men department, a reference which I absolutely 100% understand. So please don't ask me to explain it. Can you explain the reference? I've also learned lot. I've also learned a lot from each episode, and I often take the Tips for Twits department under consideration. My question is this. When is Patrick going to stop holding up the Flashuggener program with his incessant whining about being co-idiot? I'd give my third testicle if I thought it would shut him up on the matter. Unfortunately, I sadly already lost it in the battle of Dien Bien Phu. Sincerely, Second Lieutenant Lyle Bridginghamstein. Dictated, but not read.
Well, that's a very nice letter. All that stuff about enjoying.
Fuck him, too.
You have some thoughts on the French Foreign Legion? My God. Now we're going to have the French Foreign Legion coming after us.
I have some thoughts on the French Foreign Legion, the French Indochina War.
That's what that battle's from, isn't it?
Well, presumably. That's the inference I made. If he's 87 years old, he was in the Foreign Legion, and he was in a battle that sounds Vietnamese.
Where he lost a third ball.
He lost his third testicle.
That reminds me. I forgot to say something.
What?
Lyle, thank you for your service.
You're supposed to say it to Americans.
He could be American. It's a French Foreign Legion.
Good point.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're...
That was a microaggression against the French Foreign Legion.
I'm going to say based on his last name. Look, I'm like... The way I'm putting this all together, you'd think that I'm some type of Sherlock Holmes or something. Based on his last name, I don't think that he's American. Bridginghamstein? I think he's British.
It sounds like a Jewish last name. What's the email address on that one? I'll just bleep it out later.
Tiny comfortable nosehole at yahoo.com.
Oh, interesting. Weird. Anyway, I think that's a very nice letter.
Yeah.
So thanks again to all our letters, and please send us more letters.
Not if they're like that, though. Okay?
All right, we better be moving on. that vein in your forehead is getting pretty big.
All right. What is it, the begging and groveling department?
Yes, we're in the begging and groveling department.
Well, today in the begging and groveling department, all I just wanted some respect. That's all.
You're supposed to humble yourself. We're begging and groveling. We're down on our knees.
Don't even review. Don't even like it.
Open arms. Open mouths. We're here to take it all in.
Respect.
They seem very respectful to me. I don't know.
I mean, I think that you could also be equally insulted because it was mostly about me.
That's true. My takeaway was we have 2 listeners that were engaged enough to write a letter.
And you know what? I'm going to try to have an attitude of gratitude and appreciate that.
There we go. Normally, we don't bring our bitterness over letters into the begging and groveling department. These are discreet departments, and we have a good attitude.
Yeah. Anyway, hey, I really hope people like this podcast.
Yeah. So if you can rate and review wherever you get your podcast, that would be a big help. Give us a perfect rating wherever that is. I think we're only like 4 stars on Spotify, so someone didn't do it right. Give us 5.
Yeah,
Whatever it is that they rate.
Tell us how you feel in the comment, but give us 5 stars.
Yeah, come on.
Give us
Come on,
5
please.
stars, and then in the comments say JK LOL, it's 3. But give us the 5.
That works. That works. That's double engagement.
Yeah, it looks great on our part.
And tell your friends, tell your family, write us some letters, and check us out, you know?
Yeah. Hey, Kyle.
Yes?
You know what? Fuck you, too.
You got a real chip on your shoulder today, Patrick.
I'm pissed about the letters again. But hey, what if people want more of you and less of me?
Well, you can find me at my website at kylebridget.com, where you can hire me to draw cartoons or teach you how to draw cartoons, or, you know, really do anything that you can give someone money to do. I will do that. Also, you can find me on YouTube and everywhere else at Little Cozy Nostril, where I do a show called Canonically Crumb, where I explore the comics and characters of the Crummyverse. And also check out my TeePublic account, which you can find through my website and probably through the show description. And I got all kinds of t-shirts on there, including a brand new Podrzebie t-shirt that you can buy. I think it's still probably on sale. Well, it won't be when this comes out, but they have sales all the time. So pick yourself up a nice Podrzebie t-shirt from there. What about you, Patrick?
Hey, you can find me at flippinthrough.com. You can find links to my Instagram, my Etsy store, where I only sell buttons because that's all I care about. So stupid. And also the YouTube channel, which you can also find at youtube.com/@flippinthrough. I do a weekly video of a Mad magazine. I flip through and review it. And every other Sunday, I do a live stream. So please check that out. Thank you so much for listening.
By the way, Ed, how's your mom? Yeah, and we'll see if we get sued by Michael Buffer.
Let's get Yeti to rumble. Can I do that?
Can you do that? Well, we might get bleeped. We might get shut down by YouTube. He does sue quite a bit.
Imagine like being him and like hiring an AI to listen to all the YouTube videos and podcasts and just knock people for saying, let's get Yeti to rumble.
It's weird, the concept of hiring an AI.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like a PI, you know, like like there might be some hard-boiled artificial intelligence out there.
Yeah. It was a Saturday morning when Michael Buffer wandered into my office. He had a set of legs on him.
Oh, my God.